Hello and welcome back to Serial Killers. We will be now concluding Volume 3 with a biography on the more famous serial killer Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer or the BTK Strangler, who had a victim count of 10. Dennis Rader's parents, Dorothea May Cook and William and Evelyn Rader, dated as teens and married in 1943. William Rader joined the Marines and fought during World War II, and after the war, the couple moved next to Dorothea's parents in Columbus, Kansas. While Dorothea was pregnant with Dennis, she fell off a horse in a riding accident, which could have had some profound effect on Dennis as a developing fetus, especially in the brain. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9th, 1945, and was also dropped as a baby, possibly causing a traumatic brain injury. Rader also remembers his grandparents being very emotionally callous. Around 3 or 4 years old, Rader began to see monsters, and he was possibly suffering from crap, I forgot how to say this. Hold on. But what's interesting about Dennis Rader is there isn't a lot of childhood abuse or trauma that is experienced in Dennis Rader's life. So we have one of those more natural born where it's more nature other than nurture, which is the areas of serial pathology we don't quite understand as much, yet at least. So sorry, just excuse me 1 second.
Pareidolia.
Pareidolia, or seeing things that aren't actually there. However, this is not the same as any type of delusion or hallucination or any psychosis or signs of schizophrenia. It's mainly just when your brain sees a specific pattern, which is actually random, but because our brain enjoys patterns, it looks for patterns that aren't there. It actually happens a lot with conspiracy theories. Seeing these monsters gave Rader an intense sense of fear that was also simultaneously aroused by this fear that he experienced. When Rader was about 4 years old, his mother was searching under the couch when her earrings suddenly got caught on some part of the couch, and causing Rader's mother to become very frantic, screaming for help and crying at Rader to get his grandparents. Rader was scared, yet he also remembered being excited about this incident. In 1949, Rader moved from Columbus to Wichita, Kansas, in order to live on a farm. He was fascinated and even sexually excited when his parents tied up the chickens and before the chickens were butchered for the meat. He also enjoyed the animals' torment and struggle. Rader's mother would discipline him with a belt as well, also enforcing that link with pleasure and pain. Rader struggled in school both academically and socially. He became withdrawn from his peers and other people in general. However, he did become, some would say, even obsessed with horror movies that he watched with his mother. Rader was especially fascinated by movies with women held captive by serial killers. However, that's no mean to say that just because someone watches a lot of horror movies that they're going to become a serial killer. There's no cause for that. Same thing with violent video games won't turn you into a violent person. It's just unsubstantiated. Rader developed a sexual attraction to his mother, or as we all know, the Freudian thing of an Oedipus complex, around the age of 10, and he began to masturbate into his mother's underwear and became aroused whenever his mother would discipline him with the belt. Um, Usually, his mother would discipline him by whipping him with the belt when she often caught him masturbating, especially into his mother's underwear. Rader also became interested and then obsessed with sexual bondage and began to experiment with erotic asphyxiation or asphyxophilia, which is, of course, based on, if you couldn't tell by the name, a type of paraphilia. In the mid 1950s, Rader, now 11 years old, began to stalk and spy on women around his neighborhood. He would even bring binding ropes to tie himself up until he orgasmed or ejaculated. When Rader was 12 years old, he was also bullied in school. He was tied up with a rope and threatened, all of which actually aroused him sexually instead of intimidating or frightening or scaring him, which most people would respond to when being bullied in this fashion. Rader also became sexually aroused by murder mystery stories, especially one of a man who strangled his girlfriend. Rader nicknamed his desires the Black Hat and kept his violent desires a secret, recognizing the darkness of his desires and the social unacceptedness of it, and decided he would devote himself to become a good person. By not drinking any alcohol, he wouldn't smoke or swear. However, in Rader's early adolescent years, he began to strangle and torture cats as well as other small animals, a common feature among serial killers in their childhood. By 1959, Rader continued to be sexually excited by murder, strangulation, and torture, as well as, of course, bondage. He often daydreamed and fantasized about torture and even acted it out. He called this cubing, which he used it to escape the boring reality of his daily life or act out his fantasies. He also referred to this cubing as his ability to compartmentalize his sexual desires with a normal behavior. In 1959, Rader became increasingly obsessed with serial killers, and by the winter of 1959, Rader escalated from not only spying on women and tying himself up, but also began to steal items from women he stalked. These were mainly clothing, especially underwear or stockings, which Rader would often masturbate with and even wear the clothing himself, especially the underwear. Around this time, Rader also became obsessed with the number 3, which carried off into his later adult life. When Rader entered high school, he continued to struggle academically and wasn't all that concerned about his grades, and he might even have a possible learning disability. But he did have a job at a welding shop, and he continued to stay active in his church. Rader graduated from high school in the spring of 1963, but by barely passing. After high school, Rader worked with his mother at a store called Leaker's Family Foods. He often went on dates with several different women and found a girlfriend, but he still dated several women on the side, even with his girlfriend. In his private time, Rader would often cut out photos of women from newspapers and magazines and use them to draw pictures of his dark bondage fantasies. In 1964, Rader moved out of his parents' house and moved in with a roommate who I do not know the name of. Rader also began to attend college. Around this time, Rader began to organize what he referred to as a hit kit full of different and various weapons. Even with Rader being shy, even as an adult, he now had a very larger social life that took up a lot of his time, and so his hit kit and stalking of women was kind of put on hold. However, even though attending college, he still struggled academically. In 1968, Rader joined the Air Force and was stationed in Japan. He said that carrying a gun made him feel like James Bond. And while he was stationed in Japan, Rader had sex for his first time with a prostitute. Rader also served tours in Korea, Turkey, Greece, Vietnam, and I cannot pronounce that. Rader then finished his military service in 1970 and returned to Wichita, Kansas, where he again began to attend church. Rader's mother set him up with a fellow church member who was named Paula Dietz. The two dated for a few months until they got married on May 22nd, 1971. Rader's social life and new wife kept him busy, and he seemed to have been able to suppress his violent urges. However, he continued to cut out photos of women and create bondage images for his fantasies. Rader also began to sneak off to abandoned barns to strangle himself for sexual pleasure, sometimes to the point of near unconsciousness. In 1971, Rader organized another one of his hit kits, and he was ready to fully escalate into murder if the opportunity ever arose. However, Rader had no specific plan or victim. It was more just if opportunity comes knocking. Rader was a good husband to Paula, and the couple moved to Park City, Kansas. And Rader got a job at the Coleman Company, which was an outdoor supply store. Then in October of 1973, Rader lost his job at the Coleman Company, and with no longer being very busy or occupied with work or family, things have kind of settled down with the marriage, Rader became absorbed in his fantasies. Rader began breaking into houses, but was no longer excited by doing this, by just simply breaking in and stealing clothing. And he needed to escalate his crimes, and so he began searching for a potential victim. In winter of 1973, Rader attempted to kidnap a female bank teller he was stalking, but while attacking her, he attempted to force her into his car, but the woman struggled, so Rader gave up and ran away. However, he continued to stalk her at the bank. Since Rader's first attempt at claiming a victim failed, he began to search for a different victim. He often did this while he was driving with his wife to work, or more accurately, since he didn't have a job, driving his wife to work. Rader saw a Latin American woman and her daughter on one of these occasions, and Rader decided that they would be his first victims. Here is some photos of Rader in the Air Force during his military service. One's kind of pixelated. This, I'm not entirely sure when it was taken, but probably after the Air Force or sometime, I don't know. Rader mainly targeted the little girl who was named Josephine, or she was nicknamed Josie Otero, who was the youngest of the Otero family. Rader began to stalk the Otero family and named what he liked to refer to them as projects, which were what he nicknamed his murders, just out of his little fantasy and to just avoid suspicion. And he called his first project Little Mex, even though the Oteros were actually Puerto Rican. Rader named his murders and stalking activities projects, or for short, PJs, in order to throw off anyone who might become suspicious or might have stumbled, because he did have a lot of things. He often wrote about this stuff. Plus, he made him feel superior and like a spy to be able to trick everyone. Rader spent the next few weeks studying the family's patterns and schedules and found out the Oteros lived on 103rd North Edgemore Street, and the children were enrolled in judo classes. Not necessarily the easiest targets. Using the Otero street address of 803 North Edgemore Street and Rader's growing obsession with the number 3, Rader was now more convinced than ever that the Oteros should be his first victims to kill. During Rader's stalking of the Oteros, he picked up on their normal routine, which was that the eldest Otero children were at school, while their father, Joseph Otero, who was 38 years old, was at work, while the mother, Julie Otero, who was 33, and the two youngest Otero children, Joseph Otero Jr., 9 years old, and as before mentioned, Josephine Otero, 11 years old, were at home. Rader's plan, based off of this normal routine, was to wait until Joseph Otero. Wait. Let me start over. Rader's plan was to wait until Joseph Otero left, and leaving Joseph Otero Jr., Julie Otero, and Josephina Otero home alone. Rader would then break in, tie up Julie Otero and Josephina Otero, and then kill Joseph Otero Jr. He would then take the little girl and the woman to an abandoned farm to slowly torture them before killing them. On the morning of January 15th, 1974, Rader, now 28 years old, drove over to the Otero household with a rope, window blind cords, tape, a knife, and a .22 caliber pistol. He parked a few blocks away from the Otero house, where he walked up to the house in the snow. However, Joseph Otero, who was normally at work at this time, was recently in a car accident and was at home recovering from the incident. Rader jumped over the fence and cut the phone lines around 8:20 a.m. He then walked over to the back door of the house, which was locked. Rader then noticed that the Oteros had a dog who was named Lucky, and he didn't see that while he was stalking the Oteros, so now he's sort of becoming a bit nervous. Rader at that time considered leaving with the dog's added risk, but Joseph Otero Jr. then opened the door in order to let Lucky out. Lucky barked at Rader, so in a panic, he pulled out his pistol and forced his way into the kitchen, where Julie Otero and Josephine Otero were at. Joseph Otero Jr. started to cry, and Joseph Otero, who was resting in the bedroom, overheard the commotion and ran into the kitchen. Rader became even more concerned with Joseph Otero's presence in the house and had doubts about being able to overpower two adults, especially considering this is his first time. Rader decided to try and convince the Oteros that he was simply a wanted fugitive looking for a getaway and was just a harmless thief. Joseph Otero and Rader briefly talked about their time in the military and first thought it was a hoax from one of his army friends until he saw Rader's gun. Joseph Otero then urged his family to cooperate and told Rader he could take whatever he wanted to and then leave. Lucky the dog, meanwhile, continued to bark at Rader, which made Rader increasingly nervous and on edge, so Rader ordered to have Lucky put outside. Rader then took the family into the main bedroom, where he tied everyone up with duct tape. At this point, Rader became aroused while doing so, and then he proceeded to gag the Oteros. Julie Otero became concerned and asked Rader what he was going to do to them. Rader lied and said that he would just take a few things and then call the police after he left. Rader then decided to kill Joseph Otero first, as he was the biggest threat to him, considering the fact he's a fully grown male. In order to get him out of the way before he engaged in his sadistic sexual fantasies. Rader strangled Joseph Otero. After that, Rader then began to beat Julie Otero across the face and strangled her as well. After that, Rader next choked Josephine Otero until she fell unconscious, and then moved on to Joseph Otero Jr., who was sobbing quite a lot. He put a bag over the boy's head. Joseph Otero and Julie Otero began to wake up as Rader didn't strangle the two enough in order to kill them. Since it was Rader's first time strangling a person, and he didn't realize the strength that was actually required to strangle someone to death, and the fact that it takes a very long time for the brain to completely lose consciousness and lack of oxygen in order to die. Julie Otero began to beg for her children's lives, which most likely excited Rader even more as he enjoyed her suffering, clearly sadistic. Rader strangled Julie Otero again, but this time he used a double hitch knot and placed a pillowcase over her head. Julie Otero soon died afterward, and Rader then strangled Joseph Otero again with a belt. Rader decided to slowly kill the two children and took Joseph Otero Jr. into his own bedroom, where Rader placed a plastic bag and t-shirt over his head and then tied a cord around his neck and placed a chair next to Joseph Otero's body as he watched the boy suffocate, and die. Rader then took Josephine Otero down into the basement and hung her on a sewer pipe as she slowly asphyxiated and died. Rader then sexually assaulted Josephine Otero and ejaculated onto her leg. Rader killed all four Oteros in less than 2 hours, after which Rader began to clean up the crime scene, using things he had learned from detective books and TV shows to throw off police. Rader turned up the heating in order to throw off the time of death. He drove the Otero car to a grocery store and raised the seat to make police think that the killer was shorter. Rader left his knife at the crime scene, but he took Joseph Otero's watch, which was silver, as a souvenir, and then drove home and settled back into his normal routine. The four bodies were discovered by the family's eldest child, Charlie Otero, who was in 10th grade at the time and had returned home from school. His other siblings, Danny and Carmen, came home soon after. The police had no leads to the Otero murders, and Rader soon needed another fix. So he began to stalk more women again, and just only a few weeks after the killings in search of a new victim. This is the crime scene. It's kind of a bad quality, but you can see Julie Otero on the bed in the bedroom. You can see the strangle marks from the rope. Her nose is bloody. This is Joseph Otero Jr. with the bag and t-shirts over his head tied with a belt in his bedroom floor. It appears his feet were also bound. Here's Joseph Otero. You can see his face is discolored and bruised, and his eye, it appears, and beaten, possibly bloody nose. His legs sticking out from the bedroom door. This is Josephine Otero tied up to the cellar pipe in the basement. You can see the rope around her legs and how her pants and underwear have been stripped off. The police did a sketch of where how the bodies ended up. This would be Joseph Otero Jr.'s body in his bedroom. Julie Otero is on the bed, and Joseph Otero Sr. On the ground here in the main bedroom. The kitchen is here. This is around where the back door was, where Rader entered. This is an outside shot of the house. This is one of the Oteros being wheeled out of the house as police officers investigate the scene. Here's an evidence photo of the rope binding that he used on the Oteros. Since it was in a neighborhood, there was some witnesses that described someone, and this police sketch was produced. However, the witnesses who saw Rader, they saw him when he was driving the Otero car to the grocery parking lot. They described him as a white. However, the police had the theory that because the Oteros were Puerto Rican, it was drug related, and so you can kind of see that prejudice coming in with the results of this police sketch. This is the drawing in the newspaper, a little lower quality. Here are the gravestones. This is the Otero car, which I believe at this point is in an evidence impound lot. Here is a map of where the car was left. You can see this is the Otero household, and he drove it all the way over here to a Dillon's grocery store over on 4601 East Central. Then around February or March 1974, Rader saw a young blonde woman checking her mailbox on 3217 East and 13th Street North while talking to his wife taking his wife to church, excuse me. Rader began to stalk the woman whose name was Catherine Bright, and in order to learn her schedule and routine. Catherine Bright was a 21-year-old college student who lived alone and had a very predictable schedule. Catherine would also be very easy for Rader to overpower. However, despite living alone, Catherine was very close to her family, and her 19-year-old brother, Kevin Bright, often came over to visit. Rader also targeted Catherine Bright because of his obsession with the number 3 and the various threes found in Catherine Bright's address. While Rader was stalking Catherine Bright, he would often squeeze a stress ball to gain hand strength to help him strangle her better after learning how much strength and energy and effort and time it took into strangling the Oteros. He also created a story to tell Catherine Bright in order to kind of coax his way inside the house. Rader would pose as a fellow college student and say that he was looking for help with an assignment. Rader nicknamed this Project Lights Out, probably based on her last name, Catherine Bright. On April 4th, 1974, Rader drove his car to Wichita State University campus and parked there. Catherine's house was in walking distance from the campus, considering the fact that she was going to that college. That makes sense. And so Rader walked to the house on foot from there. Rader saw a car in the driveway and assumed that Catherine was home, and so Rader put on gloves and knocked on the front door. When no one answered, Rader broke in through the kitchen window. Rader then cleaned up the glass to avoid suspicion when Catherine returned, and Rader hid in the bedroom in order to wait. While Rader was waiting, he pulled out his gun and began to fiddle with it, which caused him to actually shoot at the bathroom door, leaving a bullet hole. Catherine came home with her 19-year-old brother, Kevin, and panicked. Rader confronted the two with the gun and used the story that he was a fugitive on the run and that he would tie the two up, rob the house, and then leave. However, Rader didn't bring anything to tie them up with, and so Rader ordered the two into the bedroom at gunpoint, where he tied them up with clothing, bandanas, and whatever he could find in the drawers of the bedroom dresser. Rader forced Kevin to tie up Catherine. Rader then tied up Kevin by himself on his own to the bedpost and took Catherine into a separate room to enact his fantasies. Rader tied Catherine up to a chair and decided to kill Kevin first, as he was the biggest threat, and Rader wasn't interested in torturing men for sexual pleasure. He was only fixated on women. Rader turned on a radio so Catherine wouldn't hear Rader kill Kevin, still trying to keep that ruse of a wanted fugitive that was just gonna rob and leave. However, as Rader wrapped a cord around Kevin's neck, Kevin broke free from the bedpost and fought back against Rader. Rader grabbed out his gun and shot Kevin in the head. Catherine heard the gunshot, but Rader said that Kevin was fine and reaffirmed her that Rader would let them go. However, Catherine began to resist, and so Rader began to strangle Catherine. At this point, Rader got nervous and decided to take a moment to regroup and went to double check that Kevin was dead. Miraculously, Kevin survived the shot to the head and was only plain dead, and eventually Kevin lunged at Rader and the two fought over the gun. However, Rader was able to overpower Kevin and shot Kevin in the face. Rader returned to the room Catherine was tied up in and resumed to strangle her. However, Catherine was able to free herself from the chair. But before Catherine could get away, Rader stabbed her with his knife, with a total of 11 times. Catherine fell to the ground. The floor and the wall was covered in blood, but Catherine was still alive at this point. Kevin, who sustained 2 bullet wounds to the head, was miraculously, just like medical miracle and just completely lucky, was still alive and was able to just walk out the front door. At this point, once he discovered this, Rader feared that the police would soon arrive, and so Rader wasn't able to finish killing Catherine. Rader did, however, take Catherine's driving license and a few other items as trophies and souvenirs. Then Rader took after walking back to the campus and getting into his car, he drove to his childhood home and stashed the trophies in a tackle box, and he also hid the weapons and the bloody clothing in the garage, attic, and chicken coop. Kevin was able to reach his sister's neighbor and explain what had happened. The neighbors, of course, called 911. By the time police arrived, Catherine was still alive, and she was quickly rushed to the hospital, both of them. However, Catherine later died from her injuries. Kevin miraculously survived. However, when he tried to give a description of his attacker, he had trouble talking from the gunshot near his jaw and was choking on his own blood. Kevin's description included that the attacker was 5'11", wearing a silver watch, which was the watch he had stolen from the Otero house. However, with Kevin's description, the police were unable to locate Rader and argued if the Otero murder and whether or not the Otero murders and Catherine Bragg were at all connected. Or some police thinking the Oteros were, of course, drug-related, given the fact that they were Puerto Rican. Rader was thrilled when he found out that the police were nowhere near to catching him, not even suspecting him. And he wanted to be a famous serial killer, just like the ones he had read about and watched movies about in his childhood and adolescence. Then in October 1974, Rader left a very taunting letter to the police, which he left in a book at the Wichita Public Library. After he dropped off the letter, Rader then called the local newspaper, the Wichita Eagle, so the police would be able to locate the letter, which contained details of the Otero murders. Not only, wait. The letter contained details of the Otero murders that only the killer or police involved with the investigation would know. The letter was signed BTK, standing for Bind, Torture, Kill, which, at Rader's request, he wished to be called by in order to describe his MO. And then a little after this, Rader began working for ADT Security Services while keeping up appearances as an ordinary citizen, loving husband, and college student. While working for ADT, Rader found it very amusing to install security systems to people who were afraid of the BTK killer. In late 1974, Rader's wife Paula became pregnant with their first son, Brian, who was born in July 1975. While Rader worked for ADT and even occasionally at the public library part-time, he continued to stalk women over the next 2 years, but didn't take any more victims. One woman Rader stalked, named Cheryl Gilmore, who he nicknamed Project Blackout, as she visited a bar of the name Blackout. However, Rader never targeted her to be killed as a victim, as she often didn't answer the door. These are the stab wounds to Catherine's torso from the autopsy. Both the back and the front of her torso. This is Kevin Bright with his 2 gunshots to the face, which is really amazing that he was able to survive his injuries. This is Kevin Bright's description of the attacker. It's not very good quality, but at least it's a little closer than the first sketch. This is Rader working for ADT around the 1970s at this time. So here is the Otero letter that he left in the Wichita Public Library. Quote, I write this letter to you for the sake of the taxpayer as well as your time. Those 3 just to note, these letters often have a lot of misspellings. Whether he just simply didn't know how to spell because of a possible learning disability, which we've talked about, or he was just simply doing it on purpose to throw off police. I'm not entirely sure, but anywho. Those 3 dudes you have in custody are just talking to get publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. As you can infer, they have arrested 3 suspects for the Otero murders. And of course, we know that they didn't do it. I did it by myself, and with admitted no one's help. There has been no talk either. Let's put this straight. Joe, position. Southwest bedroom, feet tied to the bed. Head pointed in a southerly direction. Bondage, window blind cord. Garrett, blind cord, brown belt. Death, the old bag trick and strangulation with clothesline rope. Clothed, white sweatshirt and green pants. Comments. He threw up at one time. I had rib injury from wreck few week before. Laying on couch. Julie, position. Lying on her back crosswise on the bed, pointed in southwestern direction. Face cover with a pillow. Bondage, blind cord. Garrett, clothesline cord tie in a clove hitch. Death, strangulation twice. Clothes, blue house coat, black slack, white sock. Comments, blood on face from too much pressure on the neck. Bed unmade. Josephine, position, hanging by the neck. Wait, yeah. Hanging by the neck in the northwest part of the basement. Dryer or freezer north of her body. Bondage. Hand tied with blind cord. Feet and lower knees, upper knees, and waist with clothesline cord. All one length. Garrot, or I don't know what that is. Garrote, I don't know. Rough hemp roll. 1/4 die. I assume this refers to diameter. Noose with 4 or 5 turns. Clothes. Dark bra cut in the middle sock. Death. Strangulation once hung. Comments. Most of her clothes at the bottom of the stairs. Green pants and panties. Her glasses in the southwest bedroom. Joseph. Position. In the east bedroom, lying on his back, pointed in eastern direction. Bondage, blind cord. Garrett, 3 hoods, white t-shirt, white plastic bag, another t-shirt, clothesline cord with clove hitch. Death, suffocation once. Strangulation, suffocation with the old bag trick. Clothes, brown pants, yellow-brown striped t-shirt. Comments. His radio is blaring. All victims had their hands tied behind their backs. Galls of pillowcase material. Slip knots on Joel and Joseph's neck to hold leg down, or was at one time. Purse contents south of the table. Spilled drink in that area also. Kids making lunches. Door shade in red chair in the living room. Otero's watch missing. I needed one, so I took it. Runs good. Thermostat turned down. Car was dirty inside, out of gas. Over. I don't know what that over's about. I'm sorry this happened to society. They are the ones who suffer the most. It's hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with sexual perversion. Hang up. When this monster enter my brain, I will never know, but it here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help that you have killed 4 people, they will laugh or hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurt me as well as society. Society can be thankful that there are ways for people like me to relieve myself at time by daydreams of some victims being tortured and being mine. Can really see the being mine of a very controlling aspect. It was a big I think that's supposed to be complicated or game, my friend, of the monster play putting victims number down. Follow them, checking up on them, waiting in the dark, waiting. The pressure is great and sometimes he runs the game to his liking. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. He has already chosen his next victim or victims. I don't know who they are yet. The next day after I read the paper, I will know. But it too late. Good luck hunting. Yours truly, guiltily. P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their MO, or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he added again. They will be on the next victim. The letter wasn't signed, however, BTK placed a distinctive mark on the letter that police will not describe or release to the public. On March 8th, 2005, the Wichita Eagle released detail about the secret BTK mark. It has appeared on other notes that they believe to be authentic. In March 1977, Rader zeroed in on a new victim who lived on 1207 South Greenwood, naming this project Project Green, of course, for Greenwood. Rader chose March to kill in part with his obsession with the number 3, believing since March was the 3rd month, it would be a lucky time for him to go killing. On March 17, 1977, Rader knocked on the woman's door that he was stalking with his kit of weapons hidden in his briefcase. However, no one answered the door. Rader decided to wander around the neighborhood looking for a different victim. Near South Hydraulic Street, Rader ran into a 6-year-old boy named Stephen Vaughn, who was bringing his mother, Shirley Vaughn, a can of soup for lunch from the grocery store, as the whole family was sick with the flu. Rader decided that Shirley Vaughn would make a good substitute target. And so Rader showed Stephen a photo of his wife Paula and his young son Brian, claiming that they were lost and Rader was looking for them, asking Stephen if he had seen them. Stephen told Rader that he hadn't seen the people in the photo, but Rader pressed Stephen further. Stephen later continued home, and Rader followed him. Eventually, Stephen got home, and once he entered the house at 1311 South Hydraulic Street, since the address had a 3 in it, Rader decided to go for it. At the Vaughn house, Stephen laid with his mother on her bed with Stephen's siblings, 8-year-old Bud and 4-year-old Stephanie, who were playing elsewhere in the house. The door knocked, and Stephen and his brother Bud raced to answer the door. Stephen won and got there first and opened the door to find Rader standing in front of them, who said that he was a private detective. 24-year-old Shirley Vaughn got out of bed in a bathrobe to see who was at the door. At that point, Rader grew excited and told Shirley Vaughn the story about the missing people of his wife and son in the photo, stepped inside, closed the door, drew the blinds closed, and then pulled out his gun. Shirley Vaughn begged for her children's lives, but Rader said that he just wanted to tie everyone up and take pictures. If everyone cooperated, then they would be fine and Rader would just leave. The phone suddenly rang, and Rader ordered no one answer the phone. He then took out rope from his hit kit and first tied up Bud, who began to cry. Rader decided it would be too much hassle to tie up all of the kids, plus the phone call made Rader worry someone might be on their way over to the house. So Rader quickly took the kids into the bathroom with blankets and toys to keep the kids busy and tied the door shut with rope. Rader was planning he would have time to suffocate the 2 boys with bags and strangle Stephanie. Rader dragged Shirley Vaughn into the bedroom. However, Shirley did not resist, hoping that if she cooperated, Rader would only rape her and simply leave. Instead, though, Rader placed a plastic bag over Shirley Vaughn's head and tied a rope around her neck. The children became frantic, knowing that their mother was in trouble. Stephen cried out that he was going to untie the rope and stop Rader, but Rader warned that if he did, he would shoot Stephen in the head, so the kids were too scared to leave the bathroom and cried. After Shirley Vaughn was dead, Rader considered killing the kids, but feared someone was coming over the house and thought not to chance it. Rader took 2 pairs of Shirley Vaughn's underwear as trophies and fled from the house. The children eventually escaped the bathroom by Bud smashing a window and climbing out into the yard, only to discover their mother dead on her bed. They ran to a neighboring house and called 911. Rader worried that the children would be able to identify him, but the children gave insufficient descriptions of Rader, so the police were unable to track him down. However, officers noticed the similarities of the Otero murders and Shirley Vaughn's murders. Both were bound with intricate knots and suffocated with bags. Rader was very satisfied that the police couldn't find him and decided to rewrite the children's rhyme Curly Locks into a celebration of his murder, but full with typos, and mailed it to the Wichita Eagle on January 31st, 1978. Quote, Shirley Locks, will thou be mine? Thou shalt not scream, not yet feel the line, but lay on a cushion and think of me in death and how it's going to be. The poem was on a 3x5 index card inside of an envelope addressed to Eagle Beacon, 825 East, Douglas City, printed with a child rubber stamping or printing set. Before signing the poem, the writer wrote, "A poem for Fox's next." The killer signed it BTK. Fox refers to his next victim, Nancy Fox, which I believe he is either has already killed at this point or is stalking her and planning to be his next victim. We'll see in a moment. Let's see, January 31st. Okay. Rader was starting to feel invincible, overconfident, and he began to believe that he was smarter than the police and he could get away with anything. He was untouchable. The emotional high and pleasure of Shirley Vaughn's murder, however, didn't last very long for Rader, and he spent the remainder of 1977 stalking his next victims, scoping out women during the day as he installed security systems for his job at ADT. I apologize. With the poem that he mailed, I kind of jumped ahead in the timeline. So if that kind of confused you, I apologize for that. But it was in 1978. Here is Shirley Vaughn being her hands bound with, it appears, electrical tape and other things. Her legs bound. This photo apparently aired on CBS. This is the bathroom where Rader held the children. It's a little disheveled, and you can see the rope attached to the doorknob. Here is Shirley Vaughn's body being taken from the crime scene. This is the Vaughn house. So yes, I apologize. He sent the Shirley Locks poem in 1978. His next victim, Nancy Fox, was in late 1977. Or something like that. Hold on. I do apologize for that. If that is all confusing to the timeline at all, I apologize, but I hope I've clarified that. In the winter of 1977, Rader selected his next victim, 25-year-old Nancy Fox, who lived alone at 843rd South Pershing Street. Pershing. I don't know. Rader hoped that there would be no people around to get in the way like the last few times, and Rader nicknamed his Project Foxtail, or occasionally Project Fox Hunt. On December 8, 1977, Rader told his wife he would be studying late at the library, and so he spent a couple hours working on his college paper. However, he left the library at around 9 o'clock p.m. Rader then drove to Nancy Fox's duplex with his hit kit and walked up and knocked on the door to make sure that no one was home. Once no one answered, Rader went out back in order to cut the phone lines and broke in through a window to wait for Nancy to come home from work, knowing that her what time that would be around after stalking to memorize her routine as per his usual MO. While waiting, Rader drank a glass of water, a tradition which he started when after he murdered the Oteros. And he continued to drink a glass of water while waiting for his victims, or after killing his victims, through the rest of his murders. Rader double-checked that the phone line was dead, and then Nancy Fox walked into the apartment and saw Rader in the living room. In Rader's confession, he gives two somewhat differing versions of what happened next, saying that either Nancy was defiant only once Rader pulled a gun on her, or she was terrified from the start. Rader told Nancy that he just wanted to have sex with her and that he would leave, again lying as per usual. And so Nancy first asked to go to the bedroom. When she returned, Rader handcuffed Nancy and forced her face down on the bed as Rader strangled her with a belt, but only to unconsciousness, as Rader wanted to prolong Nancy's suffering in order to gain the most pleasure from enacting his sadistic fantasies. Rader waited until Nancy regained consciousness, and then he leaned in close and whispered in her ear, saying that he was BTK. He also mentioned how he killed 6 other people and that Nancy was going to die. He specifically said that it was her turn. At this point, Nancy fought desperately but couldn't overpower Rader, and Rader strangled her to death and watched as she died. He then masturbated into her nightgown. Rader cleaned up the apartment and took Nancy's clothes, jewelry, and driver's license and trophies and left. Rader was very proud of this murder as everything went perfectly according to plan. There wasn't an extra person, there wasn't a dog, or there weren't children. It was all perfect. Rader just was so cocky and arrogant and proud of himself that he just couldn't wait for his perfect crime to be discovered. And so the next day, Rader called the police on a payphone and told the dispatcher that the police could find Nancy's body at 833 South Pershing. Oops, typo. It's 843 South Pershing. I misspelled that too. Oopsie. The dispatcher was confused and tried to ask follow-up questions. However, Rader left the payphone hanging. Rader was witnessed by a firefighter who walked into the phone booth as Rader was leaving and tried to give a description but couldn't get a good look. He said that he was 6 feet with long hair. The phone call went as this: Operator 1, dispatcher. Rader replied, "Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing, Nancy Fox. I'm sorry, sir, I can't understand you. What is the address?" Operator 2, I believe 843 South Pershing. That is correct. Rader's still thrilled about the police not being able to locate him, even after reporting his own crime to them. He sent the poem he wrote about Shirley Vaughn, which we read earlier, to the Wichita Eagle on January 31st, 1978. However, he was disappointed when the newspaper didn't publish anything about it. And so Rader sent another poem about Nancy's death to KAKE News Network station 11 days later on February 10th, 1978. Here's the actual recording of the phone call he made. It's kind of hard to hear though.
You will find a homicide between 43 South Virgin in Nancy Fox. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't understand you. What is the address? 43 South Virgin is correct.
It's kind of hard to hear. A lot of static. So here you can see the crime scene. Nancy Fox is undressed, tied up, and there appears her laundry drawer has been pulled out and placed on the bed along with some of her clothing, most of which Rader masturbated into and probably took some as trophies and souvenirs. Here is Nancy Fox's house, relatively small. Rader rewrote the folk song "Oh Death" to refer to Nancy Fox, entitling it "Oh Death to Nancy," along with a drawing of Nancy Fox signed BTK and a letter complaining about the Wichita Eagle not publishing anything about the poem to Shirley Vaughn. The Wichita Eagle turned over the poem to the police soon after it was delivered. And Rader was also frustrated that the police still weren't connecting the dots and connecting his murders together. So, in the letter, he also pointed out the similarities. Rader called his urges to kill Factor X in this letter, and it was just kind of weird. After Rader's daughter, Carrie Rader, was born on June 13th, 1978, Rader's family took most of his free time, so he wasn't really able to commit any more murders for a little while, but he still stalked women and potential victims. In April 1979, Rader selected his next victim, Anna Williams, a 63-year-old who lived alone at 615 South Pinecrest, but was close to her 23-year-old daughter Rebecca, who often stayed with Anna. Rader originally targeted Rebecca, thinking she was the homeowner, and thought that her name was Anna from looking at the mail. Rader decided to call this project Project Pinecone for the street name Anna Williams lived on. And then on April 28th, 1979, Rader decided to carry out the murder and cut the phone lines, broke into the house, and wait for someone to arrive. However, neither Anna or Rebecca was home. And after waiting a very long time, no one ever came by the house. And so Rader decided to leave in order to avoid suspicion from his wife, who thought he was taking night classes. Rader took some jewelry, clothing, a sock with $30 inside it, and finally wrote a message on the bathroom mirror with lipstick, either saying "Mirror, mirror on the wall" or "BTK was here," maybe even both, and then left. Luckily for Anna, she was up late square dancing and didn't get home until around 11 p.m. When Anna did get home, she noticed the mess and the dead phone line, so she quickly ran out of the house. And by now, people knew about the BTK killer from all of his letters and his common MO of a dead phone line. Here is the letter Rader sent in February after the Nancy Fox murder, of the drawing of her being tied up. Here's the poem, "Oh Death to Nancy." What is this that I can see? Cold icy hands taking hold of me. For death has come, you all can see. Hell has opened its gates to trick me. Oh death, can't you spare me over for another year? I'll stuff your jaws till you can't talk. I'll blind your legs till you can't walk. I'll tie your hands till you can't make a stand. And finally, I'll close your eyes so you can't see. I'll bring sexual death up onto you for me, BTK. Here is the letter that was sent along with the O Death to Nancy poem and the Nancy Fox sketch. Quote, I find the newspapers not writing about the poem on Vaughn unamusing. A little paragraph would have enough. I know it not the media fault. The police chief, he keep things quiet and doesn't let the public know they're a psycho running around loose, strangling mostly women. There are 7 in the ground. Who will be next? How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention? Do the cop think that all those deaths are not related? Golly gee, yes, the MO is different in each, but look, a pattern is developing. The victims are tied up, most have been women, phone cut, bring some bondage material, uh, sadist tendencies, no struggle, outside the death spot, no witnesses except the Vaughn kids. Uh, They were very lucky. A phone call saved them. I was going to tape the boys and put plastic bags over their heads like I did Joseph and Shirley, and then hung the girl. God, oh God, what a beautiful sexual relief that would been. Josephine, when I hung her, really turned me on. Her pleading for mercy, then the rope took hold. She helpless, staring at me with wide terror-filled eyes. The rope getting tighter. You don't understand these things because you are not um, under the influence of Factor X. The same thing that made Son of Sam, Jack the Ripper, Harvey Glatman, Boston Strangler, Dr. H. H. Holmes, Pantyhose Strangler of Florida, Hillside Strangler, Ted of the West Coast, and many more infamous character kill, which seems senseless, but we cannot help it. There is no help, no cure, except death or being caught and put away. It a terrible nightmare, but you see I don't lose any sleep over it. After a thing like Fox, I come home and go about my life like anyone else, and I will be like that until the urge hit me again. It not continuous, and I don't have a lot of time. It take time to set a kill. One mistake and it all over. Since I about blew it on the phone, handwriting is out. Letter guide is too long, and typewriter can be traced too. My short poem of death, and maybe a drawing, later on real picture, and maybe a tape of the sound will come your way. How will you know me? Before a murder or murderers, you'll receive a copy of the initials BTK. You'll keep that copy. The original will show up someday on Guess Who. May you not be the unluck one. P.S. How about some name for me? It's time. 7 down and many more to go. I like the following. How about you? The BTK Strangler, Wichita Strangler, Poetic Strangler, the Bond Age Strangler, or Psycho, the Wichita Hangman, the Wichita Executioner, the Garrett Phantom, the Asphyxiator. BTK. Yeah, guess which nickname stuck? So a little kind of interesting and hilarious at the same time. Um, a little after in 1978, after the murder of Nancy Fox, and I'm not entirely sure if this was before or after the attempted murder of Anna Williams, but the police attempted to lure BTK out by having the KAKE TV news network place a subliminal message in a news report on the BTK killer with special permission, hoping that the killer would turn himself in. Of course, I'm not entirely sure if the FBI is involved at this point, but they hypothesized, considering the fact that he did send stuff to KAKE network, that he would probably also be watching the network and looking for stuff, as his letter highly suggested. You can really see his narcissistic craving of fame and infamy in that letter, as well as his sadistic tendencies. How to sum up BTK: sadist and narcissist. Anywho, the subliminal message included text saying to, quote, "now call the chief," right next to a pair of glasses which were pictured laying upside down. Police added the glasses in the subliminal message because with the Nancy Fox murder, police found a pair of glasses lying upside down on the dresser. And so the police were hoping that seeing the glasses would be a psychological trigger for the killer to stir up some type of remorse, and would then follow the instructions to turn himself in. Of course, the attempt was unsuccessful. Most likely, the idea of the message probably came from James Vicari's popcorn experiment in 1957, which allegedly proved that people could be manipulated with short messages hidden in films. However, it was discovered that this experiment had been a fake and that the method actually didn't really work. But at this time, it was not debunked yet and was still kind of held in, like, it might work. Plus, sure, there's some desperation.
Do you see any pattern to BTK's conduct?
We have an individual who apparently has the uncontrollable desire to kill at times.
What kind of leads do you have?
But very honestly, we have no solid leads at all. Yeah.
Using TV, the chief tried to snare BTK with a strange experiment. Subliminal imaging.
The subliminal image was one or two frames that was spliced into videotape. And in it, it contained a couple of words. What the psychological impact of that, we hoped, was that that image would be burned into BTK's brain. It sounds rather silly now, but 30 years ago, there was some credence to that.
Here's what went out on air.
Right murder that occurred.
Here it is, slowed 50 times.
In the Nancy Fox sketch that he sent us was a pair of glasses that was lying upside down. And so what the behavioral science people came up with was a picture with a pair of glasses upside down, and it simply said, "call the chief," knowing that he was watching this. That person is going to kill again. It didn't work. He never did communicate with me.
Okay, so I guess the FBI was now at this point involved in the investigation. Not entirely sure when it started with FBI involvement, but probably after one of his letters. On June 14th, 1979, so about a year has passed, Rader sent 2 packages to KAKE station and out Anna Williams' house with a drawing of a naked woman thrust up on a bed, one of the scars stolen from Anna Williams' home, and a poem entitled, "Oh Anna, Why Didn't You Appear?" The poem was full of typos and described why Anna wasn't BTK's 8th victim, and was so terrified that BTK broke into her house and that she later moved away from Wichita, which I can't blame her. Rader graduated from college in May of 1979 and spent some time with his family. They also got a pet puppy named Patches and was sent out of town for his job at ADT. All of these family and business-related activities kept Rader too busy to enact his fantasies of killing anyone and for a while. And so while out of town on business, Ritter would act out his fantasies as best he could in what he called motel parties, where Rader pretended to be his own victim, handcuffing himself, wearing female clothing, most of the time what he stole from his victims, and sometimes even wore a female plastic mask. Rader would put plastic bags over his head or hang himself to the point of near suffocation, always keeping one hand free to take pictures of himself. However, this role playing wasn't quite enough to satisfy Rader compared to actual murder. But his family and job kept Rader from killing for a few years, but he continued to stalk women, of course. So you can realize most serial killers go through this cooling off period, but in Rader's case, it's more of a forced cooling off for a very prolonged time, which is one of the reasons he probably evaded capture for so long, because when you have serial killers whose motives are elusive and he's smart enough to cover up forensics, it can be kind of tricky. And over the course of 30 years until he was caught, it took him 30 years to finally make a mistake. And 30 years killed 10 victims when Ted Bundy killed like 30 in a much, much shorter time span. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear poem? Quote, "'Twas a perfect plan of deviant pleasure, so bold on the spring night, my inner feeling hot with propension, I don't know, of making of the new awakening season warm. Wet with inner fear and rapture, my pleasure of entanglement, like new vines at night. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Drop of fear, fresh spring rain would roll down from your nakedness to scent to lofty fever that burns within." In that small world of longing, fear, rapture, and desperation, the game we play fall on devil ears. Fantasy spring forth, mounts to storm fury, then winter calm at the end. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Alone now in another time span, I lay with sweet in rapture garments across most private thought. Bed of spring, moist grass, clean before the sun, enslaved with control, warm wind scenting the air, sunlight sparkle, tears in eyes so deep and clear. Alone again I trod in past memory of mirrors and ponder why for number 8 was not. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? In April 1985, so quite some time has now passed, Rader was now 40 years old and was not as fit or agile as before, and so he selected an older woman that would be a bit more easier for him to overpower and kill and would take less energy. And so he selected his neighbor in Park City, which is kind of a bold move to kill someone so close to you, but he's getting cocky at this point and narcissistic, thinking he's invincible and he can't be caught. So, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, who Rader named Project Cookie as she worked at a local cafe. Rader's son Brian, now 9 years old, was in the Boy Scouts for 2 years, and Rader was a scout leader. On April 26th, the scouts were having a camping trip, and Rader knew that this would give him the time he needed in order to commit his next murder. During this camping trip, Rader spent the evening at the campgrounds and told the other fathers that he was going to bed. Once Rader was inside his tent, he sneaked out and drove to a bowling alley and pretended to be drunk, and hired a taxi driver to drive him a block away from Maureen's house on 6254th North Independence Street. Rader snuck through the house of his wife's parents and over to Maureen's house. Rader then cut the phone lines and before he broke into the house and waited for Maureen to come home, as per usual. When Maureen returned home, she was with a male friend, so Rader hid inside the closet for about an hour until her friend left and Maureen went to bed. Maureen then woke up to find Rader choking her, and she soon died a little afterwards. Kind of interesting to see, after clearly quite a bit of time from his last murder, like 5 years or something. More than 5 years, like 7 years, I think. You would think that after not indulging his fantasies for so long, that he would kind of take his time to enact his sadism, but he's like immediately choking and killing her kind of quickly. So I just kind of find that interesting. Kind of like getting straight to the thrill. Rader then tied her up to enact his sexual fantasies in a bit different way. He covered the body in a blanket and drove Maureen's corpse to his church. Inside the church, Rader took photos of Maureen's body in the church's classroom with the body positioned as if it were a doll. Rader then dumped Maureen's body in a ditch by 53rd North and Webb Road, abandoned her car, and then drove his own car back to the campsite with never being noticed that he was gone. Here's Maureen Hedge with, I don't know if maybe it's a friend or a husband. Here are some of the photos Rader took of her in the church. Oops. Here's some photos Rader as his Boy Scout leader. Holding a goat cake or something. Some people, when they are just absolutely baffled by how someone can be a Boy Scout leader yet also a sadistic killer, and it really highlights Rader's amazing ability to compartmentalize the two so very well, like sometimes even more than other serial killers. It's that good of compartmentalizing. Because I'm not entirely sure how much of his sadism came into the bedroom with his wife Paula. If none, then that's very good compartmentalizing. Police suspected that it was actually Maureen's male friend that killed her, as he was the last to see her alive. However, when Rader and his neighbors were talking about the murder, because Maureen lived nearby, and so that's kind of a hot topic for gossip. Rader said that the friend didn't kill her, and he was very adamant about it. Can kind of see how it bugs him that someone else is taking credit for his own murder. Rader then didn't kill for about another year, as he was too busy from his family and his job at ADT. But in September 1986, Rader selected his next target. 28-year-old Vicky Wegerly, a young blonde pianist who was generally at home alone with her 2-year-old son. While stalking her, Rader would listen to Vicky play piano and nicknamed her Project Piano. Then on September 16, 1986, Rader knocked on Vicky's door, posing as a telephone repairman. As soon as Rader was inside, he pulled his gun on her and forced Vicky into the bedroom. Rader then strangled Vicky, however she fought back and scratched Rader's face, which left a permanent scar. However, Vicky was unable to overpower him and she soon died after. Rader took 3 photos of Vicky's corpse and then took her driver's license and left without killing Vicky's 2-year-old son. The police didn't suspect BTK for the murder and instead suspected Vicky's husband, Bill. By the late 1880s, police started to use DNA evidence at a much bigger scale, and Rader became more conscious of avoiding killing, instead using his motel parties to act out his fantasies, fearing to be captured. Some more photos of Vicky Wegerly. Here's a kind of like a rope that I think was found nearby. An autopsy. You can see the strangulation marks. Those are very messed up the animation, but you can somewhat see the scarf that was used to strangle her. Some more bondage. There's her, one of the pictures of her lying on the floor is kind of grainy. Here's the body being taken to the morgue or something. Then on January 18th, 1991, so again, couple years have passed, Rader committed his final murder, again after sneaking out from his son's camping trip and driving to the house of 62-year-old Dolores Davis at 6226 North Hillside Street, this time while Dolores was home. Rader broke into the window, and Dolores then woke up from hearing the noise. After discovering Rader, Rader handcuffed her and told his usual story of being a wanted fugitive, seeking food in a car, and would leave. Rader then strangled Dolores with a pair of pantyhose, and she died in the early morning of January 19th. Rader then dumped Dolores' body under a bridge and left his porcelain mask of a female that he would often use at his motel parties near the corpse. The body was discovered by a young boy on February 1st, 1991, as the body had begun to smell and decompose. In May 1991, Rader started a new job as a compliance officer and took delight in handing out various citations. He began stalking his neighbor, Barbara Walters, looking for any small reason to give her a citation. You can see more of his sadism coming in at this point. On August 3rd, 1993, Rader spotted Barbara's dog, who is named Shadow, and let the dog out of the backyard and then issued a $20 fine to Barbara about it. Rader even took the case into court to try and get the dog to be put to sleep. Rader had a very large file of evidence collected on Barbara. However, Barbara was able to win and the dog lived. Rader continued to scrutinize everyone for the smallest violations, especially dogs. He even managed to get another dog put to sleep. I believe he was even giving citations for if their grass was too long. So here's where Dolores Davis's body was found under that bridge. You can see the mask right next to her. You can see at this point a lot of decomposition has set in. See the blanket. Here's the mask right here. This is the pantyhose that she was strangled with. See, her legs are also in pretty bad shape. There's the porcelain mask found nearby. This is the same mask he would use in his motel parties to enact his fantasies while he couldn't kill. Here's Rader as his new job as a compliance officer. He was even on an interview in KSN about being a compliance officer. This was way before he was even announced as the BTK. So that is even more crazy. I'm sure he loved getting that attention and being able to trick everyone. Around 1994 and 1995, Rader began stalking women for another potential victim. However, family kept Rader very busy as he had to help care for his aging mother over the next decade. Then, about 10 years later, in 2004, a newspaper released an article on BTK during the 30-year anniversary of the Otero murders, which described BTK as a killer very few remembered. Rader, now 59, was very unsettled, actually a better word would be insulted, by the article, and sent another package to KAKE on March 9th, 2004, under the name Bill Thompson Kilman, which of course BTK, by the initials. The package included Vicky Wegerle's driver's license, photos of Vicky Wegerle's body, and a cipher which read that long spiel right here. Rader used a stamp to write down the message in order to avoid his handwriting being examined. Detectives decided to use the recent communication to draw BTK out. And before, police also didn't know that Vicky Wegerle was a victim of the BTK, and so they exhumed the body and collected DNA from under her fingernails. If you remember, Vicky Wegerle got a scratch off of Rader's face, so we have a DNA sample. At this point, they began DNA testing over 1,300 DNA samples taken from residents all over Wichita. They were later taken and destroyed by court order after I think it was after Dennis Rader's arrest. Over the course of 2004, Rader sent several packages to the media and enjoyed the renewed attention. On May 5th, 2004, KAKE received a letter with a chapter headings for the BTK story, which was probably taken from a David Lohr's original Internet Crime Library story about BTK. It also included fake IDs and a word puzzle consisting of columns of letters and a few numbers mixed in, with the title Chapter 8 on the top of the page. The word puzzle wasn't fully released to the public, but it was aired on KEKE, and a snapshot of a close-up was recorded and then released onto the internet, which a whole bunch of people have taken themselves to analyze, which I'll get into later. So here's the May 5th, 2004 letter of his chapter list. BTK story: 1, a serial killer; 2, Dawn; 3, fetish, even though it's not a fetish. It's a paraphilia. It's not an object or a body part. Anywho, 4, fantasy world; 5, the search begins; BTK haunts; PJs, referring to his projects; MO, ID ruse. This would refer to like how he would fake his ID and coax in some people with his fugitive act and other things. 9, hits; 10, treasured memories; 11, final curtain call; 12, dusk; 13, will there more. And over here, I'm not going to read this part, but that's the what he most likely took from some of it. So here's the whole package. There's the driver's license. There's the 3 photos he took of Vicky Wegerle's body. And up on the top there's his little cipher with the stamps. Here's the letter he sent it in. There's like Bill Thomas Kilman. It's the Wichita Eagle. Driver's license up close. Cipher up close. Here's the May word puzzle letter. That's where how it was released from the KAKE network. Here's the full word puzzle. Then in June 9th, 2004, Rader left a package taped to a stop sign at the corner of First and Kansas, which was in the middle of the city, and containing a disturbing collection of documents, including a letter detailing the grisly murders of the Otero family, a sketch of a nude and bound female hanging by a rope labeled "The Sexual Thrill Is My Bill," Another letter was sent on July 17th, 2004, in a Dropbox at the Wichita Public Library's main branch. A worker there found the letter and called the police. Quote, I have spotted a female that I think lives alone or is a spotted latchkey kid. Just got to work out the details. I'm much older, not feeble now, and have to conditions myself carefully. Also, my thinking process is not as sharp as it used to be. I think fall or winter would be just about right for the hit. Got to do it this year or next. Time is running out for me. That was the letter from the public library. The same package also contained a claim that BTK had engineered the recent death of a 19-year-old man from Argano, I don't know, another place in Kansas, named Jake Allen, who committed suicide by lying on railroad tracks 12 days earlier. He also claimed to have lured the young man to his death via a series of computer chats. This claim was later disproved as a hoax, with no evidence that Allen had ever had any such internet connection with anyone, especially Rader. Despite this renewed pressure from the public, the police refused to release any details of the package from June on, as it was feared that the publicity could provoke BTK into a killing frenzy. Of course, not publishing letters would possibly have the same effect, but luckily, no one else died. On October 22nd, 2004, BTK left a letter in the UPS Dropbox outside the Omni Center at 250 North Kansas Street, with an assortment of cards that had images pasted onto them, including one of a bound woman with a look of sheer terror on her face, some pictures of children with bindings drawn across their bodies and faces, and contained what BT claimed to be his autobiography, listing a number of details about his life, such as being born in 1939, his father dying in the war, mother dated a railroad detective, and being fascinated and living by railroads. However, most of this was false in an attempt to mislead police into researching false clues. I'm not entirely sure how much of this is false, though, because I think his father might have died during the war. Or maybe I can't remember. I don't know. One of the cards contained a poem called Death to Landwehr, which referred to Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, who was the head of the BTK investigation. This time, police did release the autobiography to the public a few weeks later, which probably greatly pleased, if not excited, Rader, as the Wichita Police Department was following the FBI advice to keep the BTK communicating until the killer made a mistake, but without offending the killer publicly. They also didn't want to overexcite him into killing some more people. In October, Rader contemplated murdering a new victim to boost his attention further. However, he decided to stop stalking the intended victim when a construction crew started working near her house. Rader never confessed to who this intended victim was, but it is suspected that it was Rader's fellow compliance officer, Mary Capps. However, this has never been completely confirmed. On December 1st, 2004, police arrested a suspect named Roger Valadez, I don't know, who lived in a house with peeling paint within sight of railroad tracks, and suspected being BTK because of his fascination with railroad tracks from the claim in the letter. However, he was quickly cleared by DNA testing. You can also kind of see the suspect who lives in a house of peeling paint, kind of with the stereotype of a serial killer being a loner in a rundown part of a neighborhood. You can kind of see that kind of bias happening. On December 14th, 2004, a package was found in a white plastic bag. It was given the name the plastic bag letter at Murdoch Park against a tree. It included a doll where the head of the doll had a plastic bag tied over it, and its hands tied behind its back, and its feet were bound together. Nancy Fox's driver's license was also tied to the feet of the doll and other scraps of paper. The package was found by a man walking through the park, where he took it home, opened it, and then immediately notified KAKE TV, who arrived and photographed the contents and notified police. Kind of funny, he calls the news first, not the police. Wanting a little attention, I guess. KAKE didn't broadcast the package's contents in fear of arousing the killer, probably at request of the police and the FBI. On January 1st, 2005, Rader became the president of his church council at Christ Lutheran Church by the election. A few days later, on January 8th, 2005, Rader left a special case cereal box with BTK and bomb written on it in Sharpie in the bed of a pickup truck of a Home Depot employee who parked there on North Woodlawn. He thought that this was trash at first and then put it in a trash can at home. Luckily, his wife had thrown a discarded pillow on top of the box, unknowingly preserving it for police. So here's the plastic bag package from the park. You can see the driver's license tied, the doll's legs and hands bound, some other random things. You can see the white bag, which originally had the doll's head covered like this. In January 25th, 2005, a postcard was sent to KAKE from the name Killet, using the return address as the address of the Otero house. The postcard mentioned a Post Toasties box and the special case cereal box at Home Depot on January 8th, which he had left. The postcard led to finding both the special case cereal box and the Post Toasties box later on that day. When the Home Depot employee realized the significance of that special case cereal box that he had thrown away, he was still able to retrieve it. And by reviewing surveillance tape of the parking lot from January 8th when he dropped the cereal, the police were able to spot BTK on the footage. However, the image was too blurry for identification. However, by measuring the wheelbase of the black vehicle he was driving, it was determined that the vehicle was a Jeep Cherokee. So we have a vehicle. The box contained information about some of his projects, or PJs for short, of intended victims that he had watched or stalked, as well as more misleading information of how he lived in a 3-story home in Wichita with an elevator that had a bomb in the basement rigged to explode if the house was ever invaded. Rader also asked a particular question to the detectives, saying that if he were to put his writings on a computer disk or a floppy disk at this time, would it be traceable? He requested a response to be posted in the Wichita Eagle classified ads in the miscellaneous category using his code name Rex. Rader decided that photocopying notes and photos was just too much work, and so Rader wanted to use an easier way to send communications by floppy disk on a computer. Police did as the letter asked and lied about the floppy disk being traceable and sent the ad under Rex that it would be okay, and just Rader assumed that they were being honest with no reason to lie. Can really see how He's getting arrogant and invincible, thinking he can never be caught. Because why would you believe that? The Post Toasties box, or was been called Communication Number 8, as BTK called it, was found leaning against a road sign on the dirt road of North Senisa, 49th and 77th Streets, north in Sedgwick County. KAKE videotaped the box without touching it and notified police. The box was weighed down with a brick and contained another doll with a rope tied around its neck and tied to a plumbing fixture, which is supposed to represent the hanging of Josephine Otero. So here's the special K box found in the garbage. BTK bomb. Kind of crumpled though from communication. Quote, can I communicate with floppy disk and not be traced to a computer? Be honest. Under miscellaneous section 494, it will be okay. Run it for a few days in case I'm out of town, etc. I will try a floppy disk for a test run sometime in the near future, February or March. That just cracks me up. Here's the Post Toasties cereal box from the road sign, or Communication 8. Some more BTK writing stuff on it. Here's the doll that's supposed to be Josephine Otero with the pipe. On February 3rd, 2005, a postcard was sent to KAKE under the return name Hap Kakman, I don't know. A 1950s character from KAKE's past. He wrote in response to the newspaper ad about the floppy disk. Quote, thank you for your quick response on 7 and 8, which he just called his communications number 7 and number 8, because he did kind of enjoy the fantasy of being a spy. If you remember, in the military, felt like James Bond. Anywho, thank to the news team for their efforts. Sorry about Susan and Jeff's colds. I have no idea what the Susan and Jeff's cold are. Maybe they were airing it and someone named Susan and someone named Jeff said they had colds. Or maybe he's just lying. I don't know. Business issues. Tell WPD, or Wichita Police Department, that I received newspaper tip for a go. Test run soon. Thanks. P.S. May want to use KTV, PC, etc. code number and letters from me for my verification code to you. I think maybe that's what this number here at the bottom, the 321691212. Maybe that's what he's talking about, that identification number. On February 16, 2005, a small reinforced manila envelope was sent to KSAS TV under the name PJ Fox, referring to Nancy Fox murder's project. And contained a letter, a pendant necklace, a photocopied cover of the 1989 novel Rules of Prey by John Sanford, and a purple disklet referred to as Test Floppy for Wichita, or WPD review. Rader probably sent this letter to KSAS instead of KAKE to spread his correspondence to other stations and increase his publicity. The letter said in part, quote, KAKE is a good station, but I feel they are starting to be singled out because of me and causing problems among the people. Let's help the news media and WPD by using this package as a start. KSAS handed the letter over to police, who began to analyze the metadata on the floppy disk and found that it was used on a computer located at Christ Lutheran Church under the username Dennis. Upon further investigation into Christ Lutheran Church, police soon found Dennis Rader as the church's president. Police wanted to compare semen DNA from the BTK crime scenes and Rader without tipping Rader off that the police were onto him, but luckily they found out that Rader's daughter had a pap smear, which, if you don't know, is a method of cervical screening used to detect potentially cancerous processes or cancers in the cervix, which was on file at the Wichita State University Healthcare Center, and police were able to receive the DNA from a subpoena. When investigators tested and compared the DNA, it was indeed a maternal match. So here's that one is like that communication responding to, thank you for responding so quick to 7 and 8. I will send you the floppy disk very soon. Here is the actual floppy disk. And as you can see in the corner, there's the necklace he sent. And just some random scrap of paper. I don't know. There's the manila envelope. Communication 11. Then some other things that I can't necessarily make out. On February 25th, 2005, Dennis Rader was headed to lunch on his break when he was then surrounded by police. Rader greeted the police politely and surrendered and said to the lead officer on the case, who was Lieutenant Landwehr, hello, Mr. Landwehr, and Landwehr, I don't know if I'm saying this right, he replied, hello, Mr. Rader. Rader then confessed once he learned about the positive DNA match, but insisted that he wasn't a bad person. He was just a normal, nice family man. His confession lasted for 30 hours, as Rader loved to just ramble about his crimes, and he loved all of it. He loved just talking about it. His 30-hour confession can actually be found if you go to murderpedia.org and go under Dennis Rader. You can actually find the state summary of evidence, which has his long, detailed confession. Although I'm not sure if you are at all able to read the equivalent of 30 hours of someone talking, because it's like 97 pages worth of just him rambling on and on in the state summary of evidence from his trial, or not trial, but sentence hearing, because he confessed and didn't have a trial, so he pled guilty. But you can really see like his narcissism for just talking about his crimes. Rader showed police where he hid his trophies from the murders, which Rader called his hidey holes, and found clothing, photos of his victims tied up and gagged, as well as photos of Rader himself tied up and wearing his victims' clothing. The evidence, of course, was overwhelming. Rader also had pages of stories he wrote to describe his killings. He was interviewed to be evaluated for competency to stand trial. Psychologists observed Rader and he had an obsession with numbers and patterns, as we saw with his number 3. Manipulative tendencies, a lack of empathy, as well as narcissistic personality traits. However, he was fit to stand trial. However, Rader didn't want to go through the long process of a trial, so on June 27, 2005, Rader pled guilty to 10 counts of murder during his trial, which was really just a sentencing hearing. The judge had Rader provide accounts of all the murders in order to give closure to the surviving victims in the case, along with there were a few like the police who stated the crime scenes and victim impact statements. Rader made strange noises with his mouth to act like an idiot in order to make the police look bad for not catching an idiot. That's also probably why his spelling mistakes were so much in his letters, but also it is still suspected he might have had a learning disability, maybe even dyslexia, but who knows. Rader was sentenced to 10 life sentences, 1 life sentence for each of his victims, at El Dorado Correctional Facility, which is near Wichita, where he remains to this day. I'm not sure how old he is today. Let me check. As of today, he is 74 years old. At first, Rader's family disbelieved that he was a killer, but were disgusted after he confessed. They never spoke to him ever again, and Rader's wife Paula was granted immediate divorce, and his daughter struggled with her childhood memories of a loving father with a murderer. She recently released a book about her experience of overcoming this called A Serial Killer's Daughter. I haven't read it yet, but I do want to purchase it and read it soon, but I'm sure it's very to kind of get a picture of what she's going through because, ooh, that's a lot to deal with. In prison, Rader spent his time contemplating his own mind and psychology and cooperated in a book deal with a psychologist that determined Rader had disturbed sexual needs, a desire to control others, and a deep wish to be infamous. After Rader's arrest, the police, more specifically the FBI's cryptography or crypto unit, CRRU, was able to crack one of his code from the March 2004 letter, which you can see above, if you remember that, which he sent to the media. With Rader's help using a table he created, which you can see below, he created this himself in prison. Here's how it works, quote, to encrypt, let's say, for example, a house. One first writes the corresponding coordinates, 2, 3, 5, 1, 5, 4, 3, 4, 4, 2, and 4, 3 in columns to give you that. Then one reads out number pairs line-wise, so it becomes 5, 2, 5, 5, 3, 4, 3, 3, 1, 4, 4, 2, 4. Then this transfers the pairs to letters using the same table, and house then kind of becomes WMLATR, houses. The cipher read, Project Piano let Beatty know. Project PJ Piano refers to Project Piano, which is the murder of Vicky Wegerly, and then let Beatty know refers to a supposed policeman nicknamed Beatty. Basically, this was just meant to let this was just basically to inform the police that BTK was connected to the murder of Vicky Wegerly because before this letter they didn't know. They thought it was the husband. And so until this letter, and the whole Beatty stuff was really just to confuse police. And really just the whole cipher in general was just to confuse police because they already knew that he killed Wegerly with the photos. So it was really just to confuse people. In terms of the word puzzle he sent from the May 2004 letter, it was released online via the internet. Many people have analyzed it to find various items and words that have are relevant to a Rader and the BTK crimes. There's like serviceman, as he served in the Air Force, spot victim, follow, cruise, prowl, fantasies, references to how he executed his crimes. Different names: Wichita, lost pet officer, his compliance officer days, MO, PJ, wrong address, ruse, handyman, fake ID, telephone company insurance, of death or death occasionally, death just in general, death. Some more analysis of the letter also shows that when he needed to fill in some gaps of just letters for his word puzzle, Ray would sometimes just simply type across his keyboard like CVBN or QWERYUI and then TYUI is just kind of just like lazy, just like M N B V. Sometimes he went backwards, sometimes he went forward, but really just laziness. One man named Chris Klein has analyzed the puzzle and broke it into 3 different parts. He proposes that these different X's in the puzzle act as separators or borders for each of these 3 sections, and each section has a different theme. Section 1 has a recon, Section 2 location, and Section 3 mode of operation. So as you can see, cruise, sex plan, strong, school, Wichita, telephone company, ruse, MO, fake ID, handyman, la la la, lost pet. For more, if you're still curious about more of this in-depth analysis on this word puzzle, you can find it at Zodiac Killer Ciphers and find it somewhere in there. Oops, I repeated myself. However, it should be important to note that some words that have been found are possibly by coincidence, when either by overanalyzing and when Rader thought they're just random words, some people have just found a way to connect random words that really aren't, he didn't really want to be there. Like there's transcending, spotlighted, time tested, stress-free, sophomores, post-school, second time footlights, non-school, ignorant, censored, Canadian, Atlantis, Atlantic, Americans, just, and if you look, that they got ignorant just by going upside down and crazy and like floated over here just by simply skipping over. It's not even really connected unless you take this kind of weird offshoot. That just, in terms of BTK, don't make a lot of sense. So here's some family portraits of Dennis Rader and also some with Rader's daughter. We don't have very many photos of his son, Brian. Rader holding up his daughter to put the star on the tree. Them fishing. Graduating from Kansas State University. I think maybe her wedding. If that was a wedding, then there's probably her husband right next to him at Christmas time. So here are some of his sexual drawings. You can kind of see with some of them, there's like BTK stuff like all throughout here. And like there's like a B here with a T. You can see her hanging in a door frame. There's like a tape, rape, wire, gag, whole bunch of different stuff. Just a drawing of a woman gagged. PJ Dogside, a moment before it over. There's the Nancy Fox one again. There's a drawing of someone. There's his BTK kind of signature. You can see the B, which also are meant to look like female breasts, and then the T and the K kind of merge, so the T's kind of like up sideways. So here's his motel party photos and his self-bondage. Some of these photos are very sexual, and some of them include, but then again, so were his drawings. They were also very sexual. Should have probably warned you, but this one does feature some more genitalia. You can see him just like wrapped in plastic bags. He buried himself in this one. There's his female porcelain mask, which he eventually left to in near Dolores Davis' corpse, kind of hanging himself and tied up. This one's at a motel. You can see him wearing a wig, some of his victim's clothing, and that female mask again. Gagged himself. Looks like their basement. Here's him either in custody or prison or other stuff prison related. Mugshot. Another mugshot. Him in prison doing something. Maybe that's his sentencing. Mugshot again. Being escorted somewhere. His face in an interview, it looks like. Another mugshot. Something on live TV. In a car. Oh boy. This sentencing hearing. Crap, I didn't realize the animations were this bad. What the hell happened? Kind of see him holding up the porcelain mask, handcuffs. Holding up some evidence. So here's kind of a whole map. Let's see. There we can see where he left all of his messages. There's one communication one here. Then can go over to 2 here. Then 3 and all throughout. But we have the March, May, June, July, October, December, location and date not verified. That's the special K box that was left in Home Depot. Then there's also the Post Toasties box. Then there's finally the one with the floppy disk. There's also, you can also see here in this box, you can see how Rader lives in Park City, and then right next to him, you can see how close he lives to Maureen Hedge, his 6th victim, and you can also see how first he kills her here, then he goes all the way out here to dump the purse, and also dump the body, and then dumping the car, and taking her to wherever her church was. All while not being noticed from her camping trip. And here's Doris Davis, whose body was dumped over here by the bridge. Over here we can, here's the Nancy Fox murder right here. You can see he took the payphone call over here. The Otero murder, and then where they left the car. Here's the courthouse where he was sentenced. Shirley Vaughn here, Nancy Fox here. This is where Anna Williams was. Otero's Catherine Bright here. Vicky Wegerly here. And then Doris here. If you want a closer thing, you can also find that on the internet. I have quite a few videos, but I'll just play segments.
For even more. Former prosecutor Alifair Burke is breathing a sigh of relief. She lived in Wichita at the time many of these murders occurred. Psychologist Howard Brodsky has helped the police on the BTK case since the 70s, and also with us, the accused killer's neighbor, Jim Reno. Welcome to the program, everyone. Alifair, you grew up in Wichita during the time period of these murders.
Whoops. Yeah. Here's his full version of his confession.
Mr. Rader,
in his sentencing, it's quite long.
On that particular day, the 15th day of January,
Just play
1974,
Can you tell me what?
You can see though how he makes the noises with his mouth to seem like an idiot, how he's also like just having the time of his life, confessing all of his crimes, which I'm sure he's enjoying, reliving the thrill of it.
Went to kill Mr. Joseph Otero.
I think it's 1834.
It's like, I think, la la, you know, see all
Can
that.
you tell me approximately what time of day you went there?
Somewhere between 7 and 7:30.
This particular location, did you know these people?
No, that's
It's also crazy. The way he sounds does not sound like that much of a killer. It's just like so kind of soft, soft spoken and Midwestern. It's kind of crazy to think about. Oh, crap.
Can you tell me what occurred on that day?
Evan. Bright came in. I wasn't expecting him to be there. And come find out, I guess they were related. That time I approached him and told him I was wanted in California. Needed some car. Basically the same thing that I told the Oteros. Kind of ease him, make him feel better. And proceeded to, I think I had him tie her up first. And then I tied him up, or vice versa. I don't remember right now.
Let me ask, you indicated that you had some
fighting. And at that point in time, I've been fighting her. And then I heard some, I don't know whether I was basically losing control. The strangulation wasn't working on her. And I used a knife on her. I went to this house where he went in, knocked on the door, and told him I was a private. We went from there.
Now you call these projects, were these sexual fantasies also?
Potential hits. Yeah, in my world, that's what I call them.
So
They're
you
called
went,
projects, hits.
all right, and why did you have these potential hits? Was this to gratify some sexual interest? Or?
Yes, sir. I had a lot of them, so it's just, if one didn't work out, I just moved to another one.
So, as I'm to understand it, then on the 17th of March, 1977, you saw this little boy go into a residence, and you tried another residence. No one was there. You tried another residence. No one was there, so you went to the residence with the little boy.
And I watched where he went.
What happened then?
After I tried this one's residence, nobody came to the door. I went to this house where he went in, knocked on the door, and told him I was a private detective. Showed him a picture that I had just showed the boy, and asked if they could ID the picture. And at that time, I had the gun here, and I just kind of forced myself in. I just walked in, just opened the door, walked in, and then pulled a pistol.
What gun? What pistol?
357 Magnum.
So you only had one gun with a pistol?
Yes, sir.
What happened then?
I told Mrs. Diane that I had a problem with sexual fantasies, that I was going to tie her up, and that I might have to tie the kids up, and that she would cooperate with me at that time. We went back. She was extremely nervous. I think she even smoked a cigarette. And we went back to one of the back areas of the porch, explained to her that I had done this before. And I think at that point in time, I think she was sick because she had her night robe on. And I think if I remember right, she had been sick. And I think she came out of the bedroom when I went in the house. So anyway, we went back to her bedroom, and I proceeded to tie the kids up.
Identified Nancy Fox as one of your projects. What happened then?
At first, she was spotted, and then I did a little homework. I dropped by once to check the mailbox to see what her name was, found out where she worked, stopped by there once in Hillsburg, kind of was in there because I knew she arrived, so I go call the police. I said, okay. And she said, can I go to the bathroom? And I said, yes. She went to the bathroom. And I told her when she came out to make sure that she was undressed. And when she took the car over to Christ Lutheran Church. This is with the older church, and I took some pictures of her.
All right, you took some photographs. What kind of camera did you use?
Poor Lord.
Did you keep those photographs?
Yes, the police probably have them.
All right, what happened?
That was it. She went through. I tried. She was already dead, so I took pictures of her in different forms of bondage, and that's probably what got me in trouble was the bondage thing. So anyway, that's probably the main thing. But anyway, after that, I moved her back out to the car, and then we went east on 53rd.
All right, what occurred then?
Sir?
What happened then?
Trying to find a place to hide her, hide the body.
Did you find a place?
Yes, I did.
Where?
Couldn't tell you without looking at a map, but it was on 53rd, between Greenwich, maybe. What's the other between Greenwich? Webb. I think between Webb and Greenwich, I found a ditch, a low place on the north side of the road, and hit her there.
All right, you say you hit her there.
Well, there were some trees, some brush, and I laid that over top of her body.
All right, so you removed the body from the car, put her in the ditch, and then laid some brush over the body.
Yes, sir.
All right. Sir, in count 9, it is claimed on or about the 16th day of September, 1986.
Had reservations about going in. I had cased the place before, and I really couldn't figure out how to get in, and she was in the house, so I finally just selected a...
All right, that's enough of that. You can find the whole thing on YouTube. This is Morrison. I believe this goes over the Otero murders.
He said that he has always been attracted to Hispanic-looking people, dark eyes, dark hair, dark skin.
That took place. It occurred on the day of the arrest.
His primary target.
There's a whole YouTube channel that, like, essentially has all of the Rader's sentencing from on the YouTube channel. It's the BTK site. So if you want to watch all of this, be my guest. That's where it's at. Some detectives testifying. I'm not going to play them, but I do want to do the victim impact statements, because a lot of times in pop culture and media, we really kind of forget about these other people who we don't think about as much. So here's Charlie Otero.
I am not here to recant the personal loss I have felt for over 30 years, but to speak for all the members of my family, living and dead. Not only my siblings and I, but the entire families of the Oteros and the Burgoses suffered from the actions of one Dennis Rader. I would like at this time to state that the criminal actions of Dennis Rader caused irreparable damage to the very fabric of my blood family. Sons, daughters, uncles and cousins, a father and mothers, aunts and grandmothers, all lost the precious moments my family's very existence would have brought them during their lifetimes. Their lost lives are missed yet to this day. Dennis Rader did not ruin my life, though. He caused me to challenge my faith, changed my future forever, and separated me from the rest of my loved ones for over 30 years. Yet I have never allowed his actions to send me to the dark side. A son's love for his mother would not allow Dennis Rader to tarnish her memory. The lessons I learned from my father and mother transcend the evil doings of Dennis Rader. No action or sentence bestowed upon Dennis Rader will begin to compare with the reckoning he will endure when his time for judgment comes before the Lord. I truly believe the Lord will pass judgment and sentence as is befitting Dennis Rader's actions and beliefs. No amount of posturing or deception will save him from the eternity he has created for himself with his time here on earth. I only hope that the sentence passed onto him by the judicial system of the state of Kansas denies him the opportunity to spend his remaining days with anyone or anything besides himself, for that is more than he deserves. Despite Dennis Rader's efforts to destroy my family, we survive, stronger and closer now more than ever. Our love for each other was forged with pain and loss. Yet, yes, it took years of straying down different paths, but in the end, we all, Danny, Carmen, and I, have found our ways back to each other with a unity and a love to be proud of. As far as I'm concerned, when it is all done, Dennis Rader has failed in his effort to kill the Oteros.
Thank you very much, Chair. All right, Danny Otero is the next person on the list.
But it is true because oftentimes we don't focus on the victim's family members who have to live with the loss. We really just focus on the killer in this true crime culture. And sometimes that can be a little, it's important to kind of get that perspective, which is why I want to show these in this PowerPoint, the impact that these have. Who's this, though?
Of the state Supreme Court say that if a witness does not desire to be on camera, he or she does not have to be.
Everybody's fine.
All right. I would ask that anyone else who's going to come forward indicate whether or not you want to be placed on camera. The next person I have is Mr. Kevin Bright.
Your Honor, my name is Kevin Bright, and it's fine. And this is the victim impact statement, and I'm here representing my late sister Kathy and my mother Dorothy. And I would like to say that, as far as this is, toward his sentencing, that the pain and suffering that he has caused our family, and the loss of such a beautiful young lady at 21 or 31 years ago, and I think about her, and what she'd be doing nowadays. She could have had a life. Her execution by that monster was, he's got to go on and live his life 31 years now with raising a family, children, and career and everything. And, he snuffed out 10 people's lives that had done nothing. And my sister, she suffered so much, and this wasn't told as it brought out here, that she was brought out that she fought, it was quoted as a Hellcat. And I'm so proud of her for that, because I knew, she had that in her. And but she lived on approximately 5 hours after that, and she received over 20 pints of blood before she lost her battle. And I just think, how much she fought. And the only thing I wish is different was that when I wrestled the gun from him, I cut my hand, that it would have gone off, and that would have been the end there. But, God was in control, so I don't second guess that. But
How many of these are there? Okay. Play.
My name's Beverly Platt, and Nancy Fox is my sister. I cannot begin to explain to you. There are not words to make you understand what losing Nancy has meant to me and my family. I lost a friend, a confidant. My children will never have an aunt, and I'll never have another sister. Nancy's death is like a deep wound that will never, ever heal. As far as I'm concerned, Dennis Rader does not deserve to live. I want him to suffer as much as he made his victims suffer. But then, when I think about that, in his sick, perverted way, he'd probably find that as some kind of pleasure or reward. This man needs to be thrown in a deep, dark hole and left to rot. He should never, ever see the light of day. And I have some afterlife scenarios for him. On the day he dies, Nancy and all of his victims will be waiting with God and watching him as he burns in hell.
If I embraced bitterness, I would remind you that you are nothing but a despicable, child-murdering, cowardly, impotent eunuch and pervert masquerading as a human being. If I were the animal that you are, I would say that I relish the thought of you being treated to the same despicable brutality, terror, and agony at the hands of your soon-to-be fellow inmates that you relished inflicting on your defenseless victims. If I were spiteful, I would remind you that it is only fitting that a twisted, narcissistic psychopath obsessed with public attention will soon have his world reduced to an isolated, solitary existence in an 80-square-foot cell, doomed to languish away the rest of your miserable life alone. If I had your devil nature, I would delight in the fact that your congregation has turned its back on you, that your friends have deserted you, that your wife has divorced you, that your own children have disowned you, and then I would remind you that you will never have any warm, loving human contact again for the remainder of your twisted existence. If I were cynical, I would remind this court that you would return to your murderous ways in a heartbeat if given the opportunity. So for the safety of society, you must remain caged forever like any other vicious predatory animal. If I were to sink to your level, I would say that this world would have been much better off had your mother aborted your demon soul before you were unleashed on this world, sparing 10 innocent lives and avoiding untold heartache for this community. If I were vindictive, I would wish you many long, emotionally tortured years in your cage, haunted every night by your victims' hopeless pleas for mercy as you played God and pronounced their death sentences upon them. If I had your sadistic nature, I would delight in the pain you feel now in realizing that your own arrogance and ego got you caught, that if you just kept your big mouth shut, you'd still be a free man today, able to eat pizza and walk your dog Dudley. If I wanted revenge, I would pray that you develop a lingering illness from which you suffer for many, many years before you ultimately choke to death one lonely night on your own vomit. If I were judgmental, I would call you the most despicable form of hypocrite for profaning Christianity by daring to associate yourself with my faith and for blaspheming God's house with your demonic actions. If I were unforgiving, I would tell you that I will accept any shameful, meaningless attempts on your part to feign remorse by responding that I will grant you forgiveness the same day that hell freezes over, although I know that my mother in her Christian grace has already long since forgiven you.
I'm not going to play his statement. Maybe a bit of his sentencing.
All right, does anyone know of any legal reason why the court should not now pronounce sentence? No. You, Dennis L. Rader, be taken by the sheriff of Sedgwick County, Kansas, and by him delivered to the custody of the Secretary of Corrections to serve the term of life for the death, premeditated murder of Catherine Bright. In regards to count 6, it will be the judgment, order, and sentence of the court that you, Dennis L. Rader, be taken by the sheriff of Sedgwick County, Kansas, and by him delivered to the custody of the Secretary of Corrections to serve the term of life for the premeditated murder of Shirley Vianne. In regards to count 7, it will be the judgment, order, and sentence of the court that you, Dennis L. Rader, be taken by the sheriff of Sedgwick County, Kansas, and by him delivered to the custody of the Secretary of Corrections.
And you get the gist. Basically that 10 times over with all the victims' names. The interview.
A rare glimpse inside the mind of a serial murderer. The BTK killer terrorized Wichita, Kansas for 3 decades. Now, in a jailhouse interview, you'll hear directly from him how and why he committed these gruesome crimes. Here's Dateline NBC's Edie Magnus.
BTK seemed uncatchable. Everyone wondered who he was, where he was, until just a few months ago, when a most unlikely man who'd lived among them all along, Dennis Rader, was arrested.
I am BTK. I'm the guy they're after, 100%.
This interview, obtained by Dateline after it was done, was conducted by a Harvard-trained forensic psychologist, Robert Mendoza, who performs more than 100 evaluations for criminal and civil cases each year. He was hired by the defense team to assess Rader's sanity.
I got this fantasy. I started working out this fantasy in my mind. And once that person became a fantasy, I could just loop it over. I lay in bed at night thinking about this person, the events, and how it's going to happen. And it became a real, almost like a picture show. I wanted to go ahead and produce it, direct it, and go through with it, no matter what the costs were, consequences. It was going to happen one way or another.
No one knows for sure why Rader had to kill to fulfill those fantasies. In this interview with the psychologist, Rader dismisses each victim as a project. He says he'd begin by stalking.
Stalking stage is when you start learning more about your victims, potential victims. Went to the library.
And kind of see how nicknaming his victims projects kind of dehumanizes them.
I looked up their
Which is very
names,
common for
address,
serial killers to do
cross-reference
for
all the
whatever
public
reason, either
lines.
to rationalize their crimes, because there is still that sense, like, because it's probably a rational, in some ways it might even be a self-defense mechanism, because there might be some tiny speck in their mind that thinking this is wrong, so they create this dehumanizing thing to help them go through with it, or who knows.
Drove by there whenever I could.
And each time he struck, Rader said he was armed with what he calls his hit kit.
Your kit contained what? Plastic bags, rope, tape.
That basically, we've already gone over that. So here I believe is on the scene of the arrest, and also where he was confessing. Okay, so now let's finally get into the psychology. Rader's childhood was very much not very abusive at all compared to other serial killers, making his case a little unique in his early development. However, the two incidences with Dennis Rader's mother falling off a horse and dropping him as a baby may have affected Rader's brain development, which may have led to his sexual desires. Of course, this could be Rader making up an excuse for his murders. Although if he did have any traumatic brain injury that affected his brain development, we might have biological psychopath. You remember a psychopath's brain structure. The area of the brain where they have both self-control and emotions doesn't work as well. So when Rader begins to have his sexual fantasies of bondage, what could have turned into a healthy bondage type thing that goes perfectly fine in a bedroom for a whole bunch of other people who enjoy that bondage type thing, and would have just been a normal thing, escalated into full-on murder with a Rader's lack of self-control from his brain, which is a theory. When Rader began to see monsters from possible I just cannot say it though, pareidolias, I think, where your brain sees things that aren't actually there usually from looking for patterns that aren't there. Possibly his brain injury may have caused this. Rader said that he was scared but also excited and eventually aroused, and so as a result, Rader began to fantasize about fear and pleasure being connected. These early fantasies may have been a way for Rader to cope with seeing monsters, to feel less vulnerable or afraid by associating the fear with enjoyment, to kind of feel more in control. Most serial killers have the motive of control. These associations with fear and excitement could have later developed into a sexual sadistic paraphilia or sexual sadistic personality disorder once Rader hit puberty and begins to experience those sexual awakenings. There is the one theory of how these paraphilias kind of develop. In early development, a sexual feeling gets kind of like cross-fused with important or possibly even traumatic event, and they kind of fuse together and later develop into a sexual nature. That's one theory. It's one theory with Jerry Brudos, who had a sexual fetish to shoes, and then his mother caught him and demonized that, and so it kind of like fused it into his mind. And it became dangerous to the point where he murdered. Anywho, however, I do want to address the thing. In his chapter list, one of his chapters was called Fetish, and oftentimes people will say that Rader had a fetish for violence, but I just want to go over this again. It wouldn't be a fetish, it would be a paraphilia, because a fetish comes from a Portuguese word, which refers to having an object having supernatural power. So in a sexual fetish, it's sexual power in an object, and a fetish can only be an object or a body part. but in Rader's case, it's a sadism and bondage, which is more like a state of being or an action. And so it would fall more under a paraphilia than a fetish. Also, kind of to distinguish the difference between a fetish and a paraphilia, and the difference between a kink is usually a kink is defined as some sexual preference that enhances one's sexual experience with a partner. But in terms of a fetish or paraphilia, it is necessary in order to obtain sexual gratification. I recently found that out and didn't put it in the terminology of the video, so kind of want to add that bit of information of that sexual terminology. Anywho, where were we? These early fantasies may have been a way for Rader. Oh wait, we already did that. These associations with fear and excitement could have later developed into a very sexual and sadistic paraphilia. Oh crap, I did that too. Rader's connection with pain and pleasure was further installed and then associated with women after seeing his mother get caught by the couch spring and her screaming in pain. This incident most likely led to Rader's connection of fear and pleasure, also associated arousal to women in distress. Plus the fact that Rader developed a sexual attraction to his very own mother in an Oedipus complex sort of way also kind of contributed to that. When Rader moved to a farm... Oh, wait. I just remembered. When seeing his mother in distress, what is kind of more of a finding pleasure and pain in himself and more of a masochistic type tendency, now at this point shifts more into a sadistic on other people fantasy. So that's where we kind of see that shift from masochism to sadism a bit more. When Rader moved to a farm, his connection to pain and pleasure was further increased by seeing chickens tied up and butchered, and further developed sexually into sadism as well. He also began to have erotophonophilia, which is sexual attraction to death, not necrophilia, which is dead bodies, specifically death and dying. Further association in pain and pleasure occurred with his mother, who Rader saw as a loving parental authority figure, would punish him with a belt, further crossing lines with pain and love and pleasure as they become more interconnected. Also, the fact that seeing how his mother would punish him, and that's an authority figure, may have also coupled with possible brain structure issues and lack of self-control within his brain structure, maybe a kind of a sense that it was maybe right or normal, or that he was entitled to, or he was better than most people, who knows. Plus, Rader developed an Oedipus complex, which is, of course, sexual attraction to his mother as a result, especially at puberty with the development of sexual feelings. Rader's obsession with serial killers acted for him as a role models for Rader and probably led to his desire for fame, such as the serial killers he had learned about and read about and watched movies about. This pushed Rader into the idea of serial murder as well. However, by no means does that necessarily include that anyone who watches stuff about serial killers will become a serial killer themselves. That's very rarely the case. Anywho, where was I? Rader's sexual fascination with pain grew rapidly in puberty as he experimented more with self-bondage and stalked women, stealing women's clothing items and masturbating into them. Rader later said that his fantasies were a way to escape the boring situations of his daily life. Most of the times with psychopaths, though, they find average life boring, and the murder is kind of a way that they excite themselves. So we can see more of his psychopathy here in that. Rader was very, very good at compartmentalizing his murderous fantasies with his average life and separating the two, which Rader called cubing, of course, to keep the appearance of a normal person, which is one of the reasons he was able to avoid capture so long back, and he surprisingly had very, very long cooling off periods, which is very unusual. 10 victims in 30 years is actually not a lot if you compare like the murders of Ted Bundy or even Ed Kemper took 10 victims in a much shorter amount of time. Well, the first 2 are when he was 15, then he's in prison, then 8 murders in less than like maybe a year or 2 years, already that pace. So long cooling off periods for Dennis Rader, which also helped along with his compartmentalizing to avoid capture. That and his knowledge of forensics from all the serial killer and police shows. Anywho, Rader received sexual pleasure from the act of torturing and seeing pain rather than the action of sex itself, or any specific age, but gender was very specific to women, but however, age was not. And once the fantasy was too great and prominent to ignore, he began stalking victims and eventually stumbled upon the Oteros. You can also see how he gravitates more towards women in the Otero murders, where he just quickly kills Joseph and Joseph Jr. Otero. Rader then sent his letter to achieve the fame of the serial killers he had heard about, wanting to have fame like that as well, probably also having narcissistic personality disorder, which would also account for how Rader loved confessing to his crimes after being captured. His narcissism led to his downfall after making the mistake of the floppy disk, believing he could not be caught, he was invincible, he was better than everyone else, and then he just got too confident and made a mistake. That's like the life cycle of most serial killers. They kill, it's hard to solve because there's not a lot of evidence to get suspects, because it could be anyone, there's not any real connection to the victim and the person. And so it takes a long time for the investigation. They continue killing, they get more confident, they make a mistake, slip up, and then they're caught. That's essentially the life cycle of a serial killer. So I believe that's everything. Sadism in a sexual context and narcissism. That's about it. And a craving fame. And also control. That's also because with the bondage, there's a lot of control. So he clearly, that want for control also continued, wanting control from his possible seeing monsters, and controlling of fear and terror crept into controlling a woman with bondage. Okay.
Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside.
Another reason why I really want to show those victim impact statements is also the same reason I put this at the end of each of the volumes, to kind of like hold that reminder, because pop culture really does focus more on the killer, and it can be a little dehumanizing to the victims as well. Because how many people can name all 10 victims of Dennis Rader just from memory? I mean, I can't personally, but how many other people who know about Dennis Rader can say all of their names, as well as the names of most of the other serial killers? I know all the victims of Jane Toppin. No, not Jane Toppin. Nanny Doss mostly. Almost memorized Ed Kemper. I memorized Ian Braymeyer Henley's victims. Memorized Albert Fish's victims. Andrew Cunan's victims. For some reason, I have trouble with David Berkowitz's victims. And that concludes Volume 3. Volume 4 is next. However, I have yet to start on it. I'm kind of still searching for the next serial killer to research. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Although I'm kind of wanting to avoid Ted Bundy. For some reason, his fame and infamy just kind of makes me not want to do him as much. but maybe I will eventually. But try to think of something more out of the box if you could, if you do comment at all. So with that, my research does take a while, so it'll probably be a while before my next video. I am perfecting the Ian Brady and Myra Hindley back in volume 2. Something kind of happened with that, so it's kind of out of order, but you'll see that soon eventually. Thank you for watching these very long videos. I apologize for the length of them, but so many other options give you of quick 15-minute little summaries, but I like the more in-depth. I want like a visual novel without needing to read the novel with pictures and stuff and the videos. That's what I want to provide, because I rarely see that option, and so many other options do the alternative, quick, little, shallow. So, but thank you if you have actually bared through them all. It's nice to have thank you. I have been your narrator, Porter Hymas. Thank you and goodbye. Please like and subscribe if you haven't.